By the day, Russian denials of involvement in this brutal conflict appear to be eroding. The Kremlin now says if it weren't for Moscow helping the Syrian government, this carnage would worsen and the humanitarian crisis intensify.
We've been providing and will be providing all necessary military technical assistance, and we call on other countries to join us. If Russia hadn't been supporting Syria, the situation there would be worse than in Libya, and we would see more refugees.
But it's the level of that military support which continues to raise concerns. The Kremlin is rejecting allegations it's already engaged in combat operations alongside the Syrian military. But US officials say Russia appears to be dramatically increasing its military footprint in Syria, bypassing NATO airspace restrictions to fly in weapons and supplies. And recent satellite images of the government-held Latakia airbase in Syria appear to confirm it's being expanded. The Pentagon saying the movement by Russia into Latakia suggests that it intends to establish some sort of forward air operating base there. But US officials admit the real intentions of the Kremlin are as yet unclear: to build an anti-ISIS coalition, to support its Syrian ally, or simply to send a message to the West that Russia is back. Matthew Chance, CNN Moscow.
Vladimir Putin to Russian army officers. Operation Salvation shall begin soon. You must prepare to cleanse Syria from Obama's terrorists. Looks pretty serious there. Addressing the Russian top brass on Wednesday, Vladimir Putin lambasted U.S. Middle East policy for being disastrous, as Saudi-backed rebels vowed to purge Syria and Iraq from Christians and other ethnic and religious minorities. We have nearly 2 million Orthodox Christians in Syria and Lebanon, and approximately 5 million Christians across the Middle East. Regardless of America's presidential election outcome, White House craves chaos in that oil-rich region by supporting fanatic Islamist organizations. ISIS and the Pravda cited the Russian president as saying, "It is morally right upon Russia to change this terrible status quo in the Middle East," added Mr. Putin. "Prepare for Operation Salvation, and with God's almighty aid we shall cleanse Syria from Obama's ruthless terrorists." Amid accusations from the United States that Moscow is beefing up its military presence in Syria, there are unconfirmed satellite pictures and intelligence reports about building several runways across Syria suitable for landing the giant Antonov, the An-225 Mriya, allegedly transferring battle tanks, heavy armored vehicles, offensive weapons, and Russian elite forces to be deployed and then engage directly with radical terrorist groups. White House spokesperson criticized on Tuesday Russian military movement in Syria, suggesting Moscow tries to establish a central air base at an airfield south of the Latakia province, President Assad's stronghold, that has been at the heart of the recent Russian military buildup in Syria. Russia has been providing arms to Damascus since Soviet times, and Moscow has been the key international ally of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in the conflict that started with Islamist rebellion against Syria's secular system. Over the past year, evidence has steadily emerged of a growing Russian military presence in Syria as Syrian army struggles to defeat al-Qaeda rebels, but according to Russian officials, the time has arrived for Russia to save the Middle East.
Russian President Vladimir Putin now openly defiant in sending Russian weapons and troops into Syria to prop up President Bashar al-Assad.
We have provided and will provide all the necessary military and technical support.
We are going to be engaging Russia to let them know that you can't continue to double down on a strategy that's doomed to failure.
The U.S. looking for a way to stop a Soviet-style intervention by Putin.
What we would prefer to see from the Russians is a more constructive engagement with the 60-member coalition that's led by the United States that's focused on degrading and ultimately destroying ISIL.
But more than a dozen flights of large Russian transport planes have flown from southern Russia across Iran and Iraq into Syria, carrying half a dozen tanks, large artillery pieces, and some 36 armored personnel carriers, as well as some equipment for up to 1,500 troops. It's all going here to a coastal airfield at Latakia, where commercial satellite imagery has captured airfield construction and improvements. The Pentagon believes all of this will become a Russian operating base. Secretary of State John Kerry talking again today to Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. No indication the Russians are changing their minds. A new grim assessment from the head of U.S. military intelligence suggesting both Iraq and Syria may be gone as countries the world once knew.
I could see a time in the future when Syria is fractured into probably 2 or 3 parts. Again, not the ideal, because that comes with some unknowns. That's going to be a tough one to put back together, in my view, long term.
The move inside Syria, a Russian-made armored vehicle spotted on the move inside Syria, painted in Russian army camouflage. Just the latest indication of what the U.S. fears is an imminent Russian military buildup to prop up Syrian President Bashar al-Assad.
The United States is concerned by reports that Russia may have deployed additional military personnel and aircraft to Syria, precisely because it's difficult to decipher their intentions.
U.S. satellites have observed at least 3 massive Russian Antonov aircraft offloading building supplies and air traffic control equipment, and another Russian aircraft bringing in personnel, all in recent days. U.S. defense officials say they expect eventually to see more than 1,000 Russian troops running the airbase and possibly launching airstrikes against moderate rebels Assad is fighting. And if Moscow moves ahead,
these steps could lead to greater loss of life. They could increase refugee flows and risk confrontation with the counter-ISIL coalition that's operating inside of Syria.
A frightening prospect for this bloody civil war. The U.S. had hoped Russia was coming around to the idea that Assad needed to go, but concerns of a Russian change of heart prompted a weekend telephone call from Secretary of State John Kerry to Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov.
The most productive thing that Russia can do for the conflict in Syria is to stop aiding and abetting Bashar al-Assad.
Russian military action could prompt even more Syrians to flee to the safety of Europe.
If we think that the refugee crisis in Europe is very bad right now, it's going to get 10 times worse than it currently is. And this is why it is exceptionally important to put a lid on this very, very quickly and prevent the Russians from actually exercising a kinetic option
on Earth. A massive American submarine surfaces in the Arctic. Sailors chip ice off the USS Seawolf after spending 2 months below the ice cap. A U.S. commander says American forces are demonstrating they can operate a sub anywhere on Earth. But analysts say in the Arctic, America's fallen way behind the Russians.
The United States is lagging militarily. While overall numbers of capability are larger, the Russians have much more effective seagoing and military capability in the region because they live there.
U.S. officials and outside analysts tell CNN Russia has aggressively expanded its military capability in the Arctic, establishing and expanding a northern command, forming Arctic brigades. They even planted a titanium flag on the seafloor beneath the North Pole. The U.S. has 2 icebreaker ships. The Russians have 41. Analysts say the Russians are much better positioned to dominate the region militarily and grab crucial natural resources.
What's at stake is huge. We're talking about this area here. Everything we're talking about here has largely been completely untouched by man in any way. So whoever can break the code and gain access to this region and all the areas of economic development and resources will be a huge benefactor.
Vladimir Putin's not only flexing his muscles militarily in the Arctic, but quite literally in the gym. Putin and his prime minister, Dmitry Medvedev, have just been videotaped working out together in the morning, grilling together, then having tea for breakfast.
I think they're trying to show Putin again in a positive light, show that he hasn't lost it, that he's still in charge, that he's still this active, virile figure.
This comes on the heels of Putin proudly manning a submersible in the Black Sea. And who could forget the images of Putin shirtless, hunting, fishing, riding horseback? He's done a judo demonstration. Analysts say this plays into Russians' sense of pride in a strong leader, an image Putin needs these days. His popularity ratings in one recent poll have dropped to about 72%, still at levels American politicians would kill for.
His approval ratings went through the roof as soon as Russia annexed Crimea. That's sort of totalitarian level approval ratings, and he is addicted to them.
System to as violence escalates in Ukraine, and Russia moves forward to deliver a sophisticated missile system to Iran tonight. New, very carefully chosen words from the defense secretary about the Russian threat.
Vladimir Putin's Russia behaves in many respects as, in some respects, and in very important respects, as an antagonist. That is new. That is something, therefore, that we need to adjust to and counter.
This follows the most senior generals also sounding a warning.
If you want to talk about a nation that could pose an existential threat to the United States, I'd have to point to Russia. And if you look at their behavior, it's nothing short of alarming.
I would put Russia right now from a military perspective as the #1 threat.
Why are they all saying this? U.S. military intelligence analysts increasingly worry Putin will turn his eye on Eastern Europe far beyond the violence he backs in Ukraine. As tensions rise,
Russia poses existential threat to the United States by virtue simply of the size of the nuclear arsenal that it's had.
There's little indication Putin will help the U.S. in Syria by encouraging Syrian President Bashar al-Assad to either step down or find a political solution to his war on his own people. The Pentagon is struggling to find a way to train a moderate Syrian rebel force willing to fight ISIS rather than Assad. The first 54 U.S.-trained fighters essentially melted away after being attacked. The U.S. may now turn to others.
The Kurds in both Syria and Iraq have been exactly what we've been talking about earlier, namely a capable and motivated ground force at taking and holding territory.
Training Syrian rebels, getting Iraqi forces able to retake Ramadi, and getting the Turks to shut down the border, all essential to winning the war on ISIS.
Your intelligence community says it's a stalemate.
Well, then you can report that, but I'm not going to try to characterize it.